What's going on, guys? Welcome to another Patreon exclusive podcast. Got Mike back in town from all over the place.
Yeah.
How long were you road tripping for?
We road trip for 18 days.
Golly, that's always been a dream of mine to road trip for that long. But with it all said, will you ever do it again or no?
Oh yeah.
You will? You like it?
Actually, we were discussing that last night.
You already talking about doing it again?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I don't think we'll road trip as much as we did this time. So 18 days, we were gone. 11 of those were in the truck driving.
Golly.
So yeah. So I think next time we'll pick one destination and do a week and a half there.
Yeah. Road trip out somewhere far away and spend 5 or 6, 7 days there.
Yeah, exactly.
Not have to spend so much time in the car. But how many miles what'd you take? Ashley's car?
No, we took my truck.
Took your truck? How many miles did you put on it?
6,500 and 23 days.
Did you drop it off to get worked on?
No, I dropped it off for an oil change.
Oh, nice.
Sorry, went through it.
That's awesome. Well, Mike has been out of town for a few days, but we've both been talking a lot about fishing. We're about to go fish after we record this. But we want to talk today here on Patreon about kind of fall redfish patterns. There's a lot of different things redfish do in the fall, and it can be pretty based off of the area that you're fishing for them in. And like where we are, what the fish are doing in topsail can be very different than what the fish are doing, in the river and around Bald Head, around Southport, around Little River. Yeah. And so there's a lot of ways to catch them right now, but if you're not diverse and you just get sucked into one way that might not be working that day, it can definitely hurt you. So we're going to kind of talk about some of the patterns that put why fish are where they are and how you can target them. So we'll start out just kind of talking about what I think one of the most important parts about fall fishing is understanding like the bait sources of what fish are switching over to. Because in the summer, it's like a lot of mullet, fishing. The fish are spread out in a lot of areas because the bait is spread out in a lot of areas. They don't have to be super tuned into areas. What are some of the baits that you kind of see, like actual bait that you see these fish starting to target this time of year?
A lot of times this time of year is kind of they're switching to like mud minnows. They're going towards areas that have clams, scallops. We don't really have a whole lot of scallops around, but we do have some little pockets that hold them.
A lot of crabs. A lot of crabs this time of year. I see the bay anchovies and glass minnows and shrimp. Yeah. The grass shrimp for sure. The big change is the mullet are gone. Mm-hmm. The pinfish are gone. Some of the smaller spot and croakers and other things that they feed on are gone.
Yeah.
So, or starting to leave. So,
I was gonna say, you'll kind of see that process of like the mullet are the first thing to start leaving, and then the pinfish will kind of slowly leave. The shrimp kind of seem to be the last thing that kind of holds on for the longest, and then all of a sudden they're just gone.
Yep.
It could be a flip of a switch like overnight for them.
Yep.
More than anything else.
And what you kind of see at first, I feel like, is those, like we've talked about this on podcasts recently, how those fish will start to orient in places like mullet highways where they're going to have a lot of mullet. So a lot of fish in the waterway, a lot of fish on, primary points around inlets, around jetties, around primary docks, being like a dock that is alone, on the waterway where they, it's going to funnel bait around a certain way. They're using pinch points and funnels to kind of direct those mullet to them, and almost being more of an ambush predator, sitting in an area and feeding when bait comes through, as opposed to traveling around and making a meal. Would you?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so right before I left for my trip, like me and you were fishing in some of the same areas, and like the week before, I told Judd, I'm like, this is where I've been catching fish, and where I was catching fish, even on, low tide, was still 6-7 feet of water.
Right.
And those fish were coming up and eating top waters and everything because it was a mullet funnel highway.
Yeah.
In that one particular zone that I was fishing.
Big primary point on an island.
Yeah. And, the next week, Judd's like, man, I've been sitting here, I haven't caught a fish all day.
Yeah.
And, you made a change and targeted a different bait source. And you went from 0 to hero that day.
Yeah.
15, 20 fish.
Yeah, it was. I don't even remember what was that when I went and started fishing the small creeks. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
So
it's and that was in our coastal rivers, especially our coastal rivers with good tide flow, where you'll get a good low tide. Those fish, as soon as the mullet are gone, will beeline it to the backs of the tiniest creeks you can find, because that's where the majority of those grass shrimp are, and that's shrimp anywhere from. So I say grass shrimp. I don't really truly know all the different types of shrimp, but what you see the most of are like those little 1-inch long shrimp.
Yeah.
And then you'll see, other bigger shrimp as well. But when you see a redfish waking down the bank, there's hundreds of shrimp popping off of its forehead. And then every once in a while it'll sip one. But it's crazy how quickly they make that switch. As soon as the mullet's not happening anymore, you'll watch those fish pull into those other areas. And these are things that like took me a long time to realize. You're like, God, where did all the fish go? They must have gone back out in the ocean. Not realizing like, all right, what's the next best bait source? Excuse me. One thing I always do too that's important, especially if you do keep fish, is look in their stomach and see what's in their stomach. I mean, the one thing that's almost always in a redfish's stomach, no matter what, is mud crabs, especially mud crabs, but also blue crabs. And with mud crabs, where those redfish are eating mud crabs is around rocky structure, but even more so oyster beds. If you go at low tide and flip rocks over or flip oysters over, you're going to find mud crabs, and especially through the winter. I mean, those fish target those mud crabs like crazy. And when the water gets real cold, the mud crabs go dormant and hibernate a few feet down. Excuse me. A few feet down. But until that's a big part of their diet. And you'll notice, like, you'll see the redfish this time of year with the little scars on the lips and they're a little beat up. That's because they've been shoving their face down in oyster shells trying to catch crabs. So,
and like during the summer too, we'll gut a lot of our redfish that we keep, and you'll see crabs and stuff, but you don't really see a whole lot of bait fish. Don't get too like tore up about that during like the summer months, because the mullet and stuff, being that they're just all soft kind of fleshy material, they digest them super quick versus seeing the shells that are left in the crabs in their stomachs. So like they're definitely if you open up one during the summer and you don't really see any bait fish, it's just because they've digested it that fast.
Right.
But during the wintertime, you really want to notice for like the little shells on the back of the shrimp, for the whites, the browns. Those are kind of the hard things to see, but you'll see those, and then you'll see the main crab shell of the body a lot of times too.
Like when you're tying flies, how much does, like, when you look in a fish's stomach and seeing the colors and stuff on those shrimp, do you correlate that into your fly tying a lot as far as what your colors you're adding into your flies?
I try to, but I don't know. I feel like a lot of times for tying a fly, I want the motion and the sink rate is the first two things that I look at. And then color can be something, color can change day by day, especially for redfish. Like you might be throwing tan one day, and the next day the water gets just a little cleaner, and they want something, either darker, or not necessarily darker, but like more of an olive or a natural color versus, a brown or a tan.
Yeah.
You can never really pinpoint colors, I feel like, as well. I mean, you can, but I feel like if you
got to get a lot of shots to pinpoint colors. Like you got to get a lot of good casts in there to really know.
Yeah. But if you can get sink rate and you can get motion or movement, some pulsating, if you're looking for a bait fish, or get some movement on one end of it for a shrimp pattern or something like that, then 9 times out of 10, unless it's just one of those days where they're picky, they're gonna eat it.
For sure. So. I've noticed too. It's like it's weird. A lot of times I fish more natural colors when the water's a little bit dirtier. Like you wouldn't think that way.
Yeah.
And not that these aren't natural colors, but like in the river the other day, the fly that we were getting our bites on, like I tried tan, I tried brown, I tried olive, and just I wasn't getting reactions, and the water was really clear. We haven't had much rain, and I switched to like just a solid black fly, and they loved the all black. Just that, and all black is something I oftentimes hear in North Carolina like don't fish enough of, and I definitely don't fish in soft plastics, but it's definitely a good bait that I think about it like duck hunting, like. When you get away from a spread, so like a lot of times in big spreads for geese or big spreads for sea ducks or divers or something like that, having a solid black decoys mixed in with all your realistic decoys, when you get away from that spread a couple 100 yards and look back, what you see is that black. That's what pops, that's what stands out better. So I think it's just, especially when these fish are keyed in on shrimp, they're such small little or I don't know exactly how to say it. Well, you just want to put something in there that they're going to see and register with.
It's going to stand out.
Yeah.
And I mean, a lot of times too, like you'll hear guys throw, a mirror lure that has a pink or an orange hotspot or whatever, the reason for that is a lot of times you're throwing that mirror lure around other bait. That pink or the orange or whatever is just enough of a different color that it makes it stand out in the school, and that makes that fish want to like target it.
Right.
Because there's something different about it. Either it's, it's weak or it's already been hit, so its side's kind of open and they can see, whatever it is, they want to target that.
For sure.
So.
And then that's how, like, I think when you said that too, like it stands out a little bit. It made me think of, or how that bait stands out with a different color. Made me think about albies, like changing up like your bait is with a million other little bay anchovies or glass minnows, but it's going a different angle than everything else. And those fish are like, it gives them a reason to look at that as opposed to everything else that's going on in there. I think that's too why, like, you think about dropping down for grouper. I know we're getting way off track. But there's like all these other bait fish and small fish on there the grouper could eat. But as soon as you drop something down there that's acting differently than like how it should, it's nervous and it's freaking out. Like that's when the predator fish comes in and takes care of it. So
definitely. Well, and like, we're talking about different color flies and stuff like, in clear water, especially last year, I learned a lot about like throwing a fly at a fish, getting the right angle. You can coax 1 out of 10 to eat the wrong pattern per se, or the off color pattern that they're not feeding on. But like you said, if you get enough shots and that fly is in the right spot, it should be able to get a reaction bite, and it's not. You start switching the colors. That's like the big thing for me is like I'll fish a confidence bait a lot of times for trout or redfish. And I might pick up one, but I'm like, I know there's got to be more there. Right. And it's like going through your arsenal. Is it a different color? Do they want a different twitch style? Maybe I'm throwing a DOA, but they're chasing a little bit more after bait fish or whatever. It's just reading the water, the time of year, and changing it up.
If you had to pick one color this time of year right now, middle of November, what would it be?
Which area are we fishing?
Just one color to rule them all for redfish.
Oh man. I'd probably go with something with some olive and like red flake.
I like it.
So,
kind of like a red bone.
Yeah, like a red bone from Z-Man. I feel like for me, like I'll fish that for trout and redfish in the clear water, and then it's just dark enough that if we get a little bit of dirtiness in the river, it still stands out, and with the red flake, it kind of catches a little bit of light in that more shallow water. Yeah. To get their attention.
Yeah, so. I think that red flake is a moneymaker in a lot of ways. Yeah. Just the way it. I don't know what it is, because it's like fish aren't supposed to be able to see red, or like it disappears as it goes down pretty like 6 feet or something like that, or less than that. I mean, there's the first color to disappear.
It's the first color to disappear. Yeah.
So. It's like they definitely still get that flash from it, but it's almost like it's a flash of something that's not there. I don't know. Yeah. Maybe I'm getting too deep into it.
No, and I mean, I think it all just depends on, how much stain is in the water, how much sunlight's, penetrating to where that red is gone. Yeah. So, but I mean, for trout, like, you throw a red flake DOA shrimp, a lot of times you're throwing it in 12, 15 feet of water maybe. Yeah. Or dirtier water in the river, whatever. That red by that point is probably almost completely gone, if not completely gone. So they're getting just that translucent figure silhouette. And I think,
probably still with some depth to it because of the flake that's in there, but I gotcha.
And I think that right there looks so natural to a trout when they see a normal shrimp come by. Yeah. And they have chartreuse and different colors on their tail, but a lot of times, those colors are kind of, they're just little hints of that color. Yeah. So, they're really seeing that major translucent body is what they're seeing of those shrimp when they come by. For sure. So, I think that's the reason why it's just so deadly.
Yeah, yeah. It's definitely a deadly color. Another color I want to start throwing too is that clear DOA that they make. But yeah. Kind of the same idea without the flake in it. But so talking about where fish go, I would say for me, what I'm focusing on a lot this time of year, wherever I'm fishing in coastal North Carolina, South Carolina, which would play true in the areas of Virginia, as well as down in Georgia, is small creeks where those shrimp are still jammed up in the back of them. Oyster bars in the creeks. Like, you can go up a tiny creek right now and almost guarantee a bite on each oyster bar. And what I'm doing when I'm getting to those small creeks, that's really what... One, you can try to sight fish them, and it can be really good. One of the frustrating things about sight fishing small creeks, unless you have a really good sun, is like those fish will definitely come up and feed a lot on the banks, but since there's like, you think about a long shoreline and you're sight fishing, those fish will get up on the banks and stay there for a while. In a small creek, they do a lot of like cutting up on one side, then back down in the middle, then cutting up on the other side, then back down in the middle. So your shot opportunities are very close to, or very quick.
Yeah.
But it can still be really, really good. And if you got clear water, if they're floating in those creeks, like it's game on. It's super fun to hook big redfish in those tiny creeks because all they want to do is just turn around and jet out the back, so they come blasting right past the boat.
Yeah.
But as far as with a spin rod, if you're not sight fishing your way into the creeks, like if it's a really, really small creek, I mean like barely any wider than my boat for the first little bit, I'll fish from the mouth in. But if it's 2 lanes wide, think about a road like at the mouth, 2 lanes wide, I'll usually go in 2 or 3 bends before I start fishing it. And then I'm hitting every deep corner, fishing along the straightaways, and like when I get to a corner, I'm stopping and I'm making a lot of casts through that corner and dredging the bottom with a soft plastic, popping cork, spinner bait, any of the baits you've heard us talk about a million times on here. Doesn't really matter, but just get every little casting on there, because those fish, they will lay up in those areas, but a lot of times they're kind of cruising back and forth. And so a white gulp or a new penny gulp is a great bait this time of year in those small creeks.
I was gonna say, and like even as we get into winter, I feel like it gets even more deadly.
Oh, for sure.
For sure.
And the cool thing about that is a gulp you can fish so slow, and just, as long as you give it a little bit of movement every once in a while, and sometimes you don't even have to, they'll just come slurp it off the bottom because they can smell it. But that's the nice thing about fishing those small creeks, is you can really dictate where you're probably going to see the fish.
Yeah.
The problem is you want to fish those small creeks around dead low tide.
Yeah.
The 2 hours before and the 2 hours after dead low, and right in dead low. The more concentrated those fish are going to be in those pockets. But I promise you, if you go fish 5 small, tiny feeder creeks, I don't promise you, but I feel like I could promise you that you will go catch redfish. Yeah. From now until kind of mid-December, probably. Yeah. And then throughout the winter as well, but they just get tougher to feed and whatnot. So.
Well, and once they kind of feed on those shrimp and the shrimp are gone, those creeks some meet the criteria of what they need for that dead winter, really cold water for them to survive and for them to be happy, and then some of them don't. Right now, all of them have shrimp in them. Yeah. They're staying warmer, so they're holding bait a little better, but once it gets dead of winter, water temperature drops even more. The redfish criteria for them to pick a certain area and stay in it gets, changes a little bit. So
most definitely.
That'll be the next transition to kind of figure out.
Yeah, this is a fun time of year to fish for them, because it's, you can really get them loaded up in some of those areas, and it's just fishing those tiny little creeks. I think I notice it in clients more, like out of any spots you go and target redfish, those little tiny narrow creeks where but you have to like 3-point turn, 4-point, 5-point turn your boat around in the back of them, or pull backwards for a while to get back out of them. I mean, I'm talking like tiny creeks, and those fish will be in the very back of them. So it's a cool, the popping cork too, man. A popping cork with a 2.5-3 foot leader, little pencil popper or like a circle popper or a cupped popper, but just a little plop plop. Let it sit, and then pop pop. Let it sit. That's a great way to get in there, and especially if you got a cloudy day and you just want to kind of cover water quickly and hit a bunch of creeks. That popping cork is I mean, I don't fish a popping cork barely ever, but this time of year on cloudy days, if I got spin clients, I'll fish the popping cork a bunch because it can be super deadly. Yeah. And you really know, like, because there's so many oysters and stuff. If you're bouncing gulps without a cork in there, or soft plastics, and people don't really know what the bite's like you can definitely think a lot of oysters are fish, but when that cork goes down real quick, like might be a croaker, or it might be a spot, but there's no denying it was a fish, not an oyster. So I always tell people, though, hook sets are free. You better swing on it if you think it's a bite. Are there any other baits that you like to fish this time of year in those scenarios in the small creeks?
No, that pretty much covers it. The one thing that I do start to bust out, but it's a little later in the year, I want the water temperature to drop a little more, is Ned rig. But, that's more
that's
like...
winter. That's
winter.
Don't. We need some content for the winter. Don't blow the Ned rig.
We'll come back to that. But, that's one that if the other things aren't getting it done, that is something I always have at least.
Like a finesse search bait.
Yeah, exactly.
If that's a thing.
So, but that I feel like that is, we're right on the cusp of it, but we're still early. Yeah. So
I think the one other zone that we need to talk about that can be so good right now is the ocean, being the surf as well as the nearshore structure. I didn't post anything about it for a little while and didn't say anything about it, but about 2 weeks ago it was just all time in the surf for a few days. Yeah. Problem with the surf from a boat is you have very few days you can do it. But that doesn't. You can definitely get out there and do it on foot from the beach a lot more days than you can do it from the boat. And seeing those fish, we were catching redfish that were just blitzing on bay anchovies right against the beach like albies, and in 2 feet of water. Like I was dragging bottom on my skeg trimmed up multiple times to catch these fish. But I mean, groups of 500, groups of 1,000, big groups of fish, and we wonder where all our fish in the marsh go this time of year, especially up here. But they just follow that bait out. Like they kind of sit in those spots, they fall out to like primary points, and they fall out to inlets, then they fall out to the ocean, and they're like, oh crap, there's billions and billions and billions of baits piling down the beach. I'm gonna sit here for a little bit and not have to work. I mean, the redfish were literally, there'd be a half a mile long school of bay anchovies. And you could see, if it was a school of redfish, you could obviously see them, but you'd look across the bay anchovies and just see these open circles within the school, and you'd look and there'd just be redfish floating in there, and they just swim over and grab some baits and kind of sit there. This cough. It's definitely COVID. I'm just kidding. But.
And that pattern will continue through the fall.
For sure.
So if you get a day where even if you can just take your boat over and anchor it on the backside of the beach, walk over and cover, 100, 200 yards of beach, sometimes that's all you need to do.
For sure.
But just, especially if you can get a good high sun day where you can see in the waves.
You'll see them.
Those fish are going to show themselves.
For sure.
And it might take you a little bit. I know for me, the first couple of times we did it, I'm like, is that fish? Is that fish? And it was like, like you said, hook sets are free, casts are free when you're at that point.
Right.
Fish those areas, look for them. Sloughs against the beach. If you're somebody that surfs, you know what the outer bar looks like for a good wave or whatever that's going to pitch first. So, it's kind of that same mindset. Finding some of those sloughs and stuff right against the beach is where a lot of those fish are going to concentrate, or at least hold over, through maybe more of the high tide. And then as the tide drops out and low tide, the waves and stuff are going to change a little bit. Some sloughs are deeper than others. So, if you can find a deep slough, that's probably, 75% of the time that's where they're going to be at. But, if you might have a stretch, half mile or a mile of beach that doesn't have a deep slough, start looking on the outside of those outer bars. And that's a lot of times those fish are just going to drop off. They're going to go sit right outside the breakers. So you may have to wait out a little bit, but those fish are going to be sitting there. They're just going to move, either up and down the beach from slough to slough or in and out, depending on kind of how your beach is set up.
Definitely. And the other thing in the ocean that's really worth paying attention to and trying to locate is, good sections of bottom, especially if you can find bottom within, half a mile to the beach. That kind of stuff is going to hold redfish. Not that you'll hit them on stuff further off than that, but it's way more hit or miss. Mm-hmm. That near shore stuff, really near shore, is definitely holds fish, because those redfish are going to be drawing at least the slot fish to the surf zone a lot of times. They're going to be in that. Or not slot, but I'm talking not bull reds. You'll find them a lot of times in that shallower stuff in the breaking waves and whatnot. So just something to think about. Diversifying. That's what I feel like I preach that more than anything on here, other than throw a red flake DOA shrimp. That diversify your arsenal, your baits, where you fish, how you fish. Hopefully this podcast helps y'all do that. The public podcast as well as this private podcast. Just encouraging you to go out and try stuff that you're not comfortable with, that you haven't done. Pick people's brains, figure out what they're throwing, figure out where they're fishing. I'm not saying go steal everybody's spots. I'm just saying, different zones, different areas. If you always fish at Topsail, go try fishing down around Carolina Beach. If you always fish the river, go fish, the new river. If I call the river the Cape Fear River, but and that plays true anywhere you are up and down the coast. I mean, it's so easy to get sucked into just fishing the same stuff, especially in the fall, especially trout season, where it's like you run out and you're going to go hit your like 3 banks that you've had good trout fishing days. Like if I don't hit a fish within 5 to 10 minutes on a spot trout fishing, really 5 minutes, I'm moving.
Yeah.
It might be 50 yards. It might be motor and run for 15 minutes, but I don't sit on a trout spot. I'll make 5 casts with a DOA, 5 casts with a trout trick, 5 casts with a hard Dean in current areas or heavy Dean, and I'm gone. I'm going to go try something else. So I might come back to a different tide.
Well, and that was going to be the next thing is you may see me and Judd fish the same spot 3 times during the day, but we're going to hit it at a different tide every single time because those fish may be transitioning and we just, you hadn't hit them right for that day or whatever it may be. So
I'll have those guide trip days sometimes where like I know a spot's going to happen.
Yeah.
And then it doesn't, but I go back to it like 3 times, like trying it because yesterday it was insane at this right tide.
Yeah.
And then it doesn't happen. I'm like, those clients probably were like, this dude has 2 spots. Like he keeps wanting to fish the same spot, but that can be, that can be a killer as well. I wouldn't say come back to a spot multiple times unless you really have a good feeling or that spot is going to load up at the right tide. You're trying to figure out when it's going to happen.
Yeah. I would say a lot of times when I'm going back to an area is because it's early in the trout season when, the fish are kind of hit or miss or a little spotty. So I'm trying to figure them out of where they're kind of wanting to sit depending on tide, depending on the day. So, I'll make that trip back a couple of times. But, and even for like redfish, there's... We talk about fishing them around low tide, but there's a lot of areas that, whether it's a main river point during the mullet time, or in this fall, transition time where baits are in certain areas, if you've caught fish in that area, don't be afraid to hit it, low tide, mid tide, high tide. Especially if you're moving around an area, take 5 minutes to make that cast because those fish are going to transition from one oyster board to the next. You might find them starting to move up and down that bank at a mid-tide or whatever it is. So don't be afraid to hit some spots, a couple times. And that's really going to open up your mind to when those fish are using certain areas throughout the tide cycle.
For sure. We'll finish up with this. We'll both answer this. What would you say is your favorite redfish bait right now? Not being like this time of season, just right this second, what's your favorite redfish bait? Combo, whatever it might be.
Man, I've been throwing topwater so much lately.
So favorite topwater though?
The Yozuri 3D pencil popper.
Yeah, that's right. I really like that one.
I was going to say, I've talked about that on here a bunch of times, but I've got, 6 of them in my box. I mean, I have probably 30 topwaters in my box, but those 6... get used more than any other topwater in my box. Yeah. So,
I would say my favorite is a 4-inch diesel minnow on a Texas eye.
Yeah. That's hard to
or spinnerbait.
Yeah.
One of the 2. I like both of those a lot.
And something else to think about moving in, you hear us talk about throwing big baits. You said a 4-inch. The other day, I went from either a 4 or 5-inch diesel minnow, and I caught a fish or 2 on it, but it wasn't like they were slapping the tail of it or short striking. I'm like, I'll fix that problem. Be ready with some smaller baits in your box, especially this time of year, because those fish are making that transition from the bigger mullet over to bay anchovies, glass shad, mud minnows, killifish, whatever it is in those little zones that they're feeding on. And a lot of times those baits are getting down into that 3.5 inch range. So be prepared as you're starting to move into the fall with some smaller baits.
For sure. I would definitely agree. That 3DS minnow, such a great bait. Caught flounder, trout, redfish, stripers, all on that bait this time of year.
Yeah.
And that's, that just, as we said earlier, diversify, try different stuff. Hard baits can be so deadly this time of year. That's a spinning bait. Mullets a lot of times are on the surface, but those glass minnows will be under the surface. So like a subsurface suspending twitch bait or something like that can be really effective. Or slow rolling soft plastics, not like mid-water column, giving them that ability to kind of feed up is key. I'll see more redfish floating this time of year than any other time. Well, dead of winter on warm days, though, you'll get big schools of them floating. But as far as singles floating and whatnot, that warmer water is still right up there. Well, it just depends on the day, I guess. Now the warmer water could be on the bottom, but when you get that warmer surface water and the bait's oriented up a little bit, you definitely see those fish float. So
yeah.
Well, guys, thanks for your support over here on Patreon. Tell your friends about us. We're going to keep the good Patreon private content coming. I don't know if that's the right word. We're going to keep the private Patreon content flowing every week. So we thank you so much for your support, and we will see you next time. Later.